Well, it's been a while, but I have reasons. If you're following me on socials, you probably know already my new portfolio is live. And that's why I stopped doing the devlogs. It was taking too much time and I really wanted to finish it before the end of the year. And on December 9, it went officially live and it was awesome. But I won't go into details about the release and the outcomes just yet. This will be for a future episode, because yes, I intend to finish the Devlogs series. That doesn't mean you can't play on my portfolio. Here's the URL. Have fun and please don't break anything. Alright, time to catch up. In this episode, I'm going to talk about 4 new areas. The bowling area, the circuit area, the behind the scene area, and the time machine area. But first, a bunch of updates. First, I improved the boost visual feedback on the car. While playing Death Stranding 2, I noticed that some emissive parts of the vehicle were glowing when boosting. I thought it was a really good idea, so I did just the same. But I went even further by adding kind of radioactive rods in the trunk of the car. When boosting, the rods enter the vehicle, providing extra energy because that's how radioactivity works, right? And it was the opportunity to get rid of those useless boxes I used to have. Next, I added explosive crates. Yep, you've heard. Whenever you touch one of those red crates, it explodes. Why? Well, let's face it, we just like to blow things up. And I was pretty sure I would find a gameplay purpose. The fireball shader is based on the simplex noise render target texture I generate at the beginning of the experience, but with a triplanar faded projection. I remapped the final noise, used some steps, mixed between colors to generate an emissive gradient, and animated it. As for the physics, I used the explosion class I created for the lightnings, and I added an argument so that I can decide if it affects only the car, so for the lightnings, or every dynamic object in the scene, so for the explosive crates. And you know what's better than explosions? Slow motion explosions. So I added bullet time to the game and I can trigger it whenever I want. In this case, if the car gets hit by an explosion, meaning that it works with the lightnings too. Speaking of the lightnings, I was inspired by Death Stranding 2 again. And I really like how hot the point of impact were looking. So instead of this near uniform blue light, I implemented a gradient from red to blue. Much better. To add more depth, I added a depth of field effect. And like for my old portfolio, I went for the cheap box blur depth of field, where it's blurred at the top and bottom of the screen. The box blur doesn't look very good, especially when it's large and intense, but if used wisely, it does the trick and it's a lot more performant than an accurate depth of field. I changed my mind with the rain. The initial version was using particles with a cool and realistic animation, but I wasn't happy with those small dots crossing the screen too fast. It was visually too distracting. So I went for lines instead. The length and the speed changes according to the weather, humidity and temperature, resulting in long fast lines when it's a heavy rain and small slow dots when it's snowy. The angle also varies according to the wind. Like for the grass, there is only one geometry and I make the lines loop around the focus point so that it feels like it's infinite. Speaking of weather features, remember what happens to the water surface when it's freezing? Well, now the ice is all slippery. To do that, I added a huge physics cuboid below the world with very low friction, and I moved it up according to the temperature. Unfortunately, making the vehicle slide on it wasn't that easy. Since I'm using a recast vehicle, it's not a classic collision between two bodies. Fortunately, the recast vehicle provides info about what each wheel is touching, and all I had to do was to change the wheel properties whenever they are touching the ice cuboid. I used randomness everywhere, for the foliage, flowers, the grass, for the weather, for the lightnings, etc. And it was working just fine, but it resulted in a slightly different output whenever we reload the page. To fix that, I used seeded random instead, with the seed random library. And I went for the cheapest algorithm named Elia. In some cases, it's not the most appropriate one, and it might not be random enough, but in my case, it's not noticeable. The idea is simple. You instantiate the generator, you provide a seed, typically a string, and you generate numbers. And every time you do this with the same seed, you will get the same numbers in the same order. And now everybody experiences the same randomness. I don't know if you can see it with the video compression, but there we can notice bendings on the overlay, following the radial gradient shape. Let me exaggerate it just a little bit. There you go. It's a classic precision issue when changing from one color to another in a long range, and our eyes can perceive each step. To fix that, I took one of the noises that I generate at the beginning of the experience, in this case the simple hash where pixels are random values, and I offsetted the gradient value slightly by picking color on that hash texture according to the screen pixel coordinates. No more bending. Among the game I've been playing lately, I also enjoyed Clair Obscur a lot. And since I was looking to add a French touch to my portfolio, I thought it would be fun to add this little skin on my statue. Although the color of the floor is not that bad, it felt too flat. So I added a tiles texture. And to create it, I used Substance Designer. It's been a while since I've used it, and the license I have is for an old version which doesn't handle tiles very well, but I managed to get something pretty cool. And to control where there is slab or not, I use the red channel on the terrain texture, which is the exact same channel I use to control where there can't be snow. In my old portfolio, I had the page title react to the car moving around. Updating the title is very limited, but I felt like I could do better. Since we can't start with empty spaces, and trust me, I tried them all, I just wrote Bruno at the beginning. Easy fix. I wanted to add a little bit of scenery, which I would do with emojis, but after trying a bunch of them, it felt cheap and confusing. So I went for simple trees instead. Unfortunately, the tree emoji, the car emoji, and spaces don't have the same size, and it resulted in weird shakings and emojis conflicting. So I defined a line array containing the emojis and their initial position, and then moved them away from each other if they are overlapping. And finally, I assembled the string. There is still a little bit of shaking, but it's minimal and the positioning is precise. I almost forgot this. Not very professional. I could have created a very long cuboid below the floor, but I know some players will try to drive to the end of the world, and I didn't want to disappoint them. So instead I created a small cuboid right below the player, and I moved it according to the player position. And I did that only when the player is near the edge or outside. I like my foliage, but it can be even better with just a slight change, before and after. All I did was to mix between two slightly different colors according to the light, and it works beautifully without much of a performance impact. Alright, we are done with the small updates. Now let's talk about the new areas, and we're going to start with the bowling. In my old portfolio, I had this silly bowling game and I decided to create a better version. So I created some pins, added a ball. By the way, adding 3 closed holes on a low poly sphere is harder than what it looks like. I added physics, and that's a pretty good start. I added a restart interactive point that shows up only after pushing the ball. I added bumpers with associated interactive point. And I also added a flying screen displaying which pins are currently down. To show crosses and dots, I use the same technique as for the digits in the career area. It's only one mesh, but each shape has its own place on the UV map. I send a data texture with as many pixels as there are shapes. In the shader, I pick the color from the data texture at the previously mentioned UV coordinates, and I move the vertices forward according to the red channel, revealing them in front of the screen. And that's it. I can now control which shapes are visible by changing the pixels in the data texture. There are probably better ways, but I like this trick. To test if a pin is down, I set a vector going straight up. I apply the pin rotation to it, and I simply test the Y value. If it's below 0.5, I consider the pin as down. And when all pins are down, I display a strike texture on the screen. Finally, I added some 80s restaurant scenery and even a jukebox with a very special purpose, but that's for a later devlog. To make the strike even more satisfying, I added confetti. Creating this kind of animation in three.js is quite a challenge because there are many ways to do it, but no easy one. Let's focus on one confetti explosion. I didn't want to go for particles always facing the camera. I wanted little 3D stripes, so I used an instance mesh on a simple plane geometry. Using some uniforms, instance arrays, and a little bit of trigonometry, I started to shape the confetti explosion. I added some offset in the animation of each stripe. I scaled them up at the beginning and down at the end. And finally, for the color, I defined a uniform array with 3 colors I like, and I use the instance index with a modulo to pick in those colors. I put everything in a separated class so that I can use it from anywhere, and created a pool of 4 of those confetti explosions. Whenever I call the confetti pop method, I take one available confetti from the pool and animate it. Making this bowling area was a way for me to practice making game-like areas. It was time to start working on the real fun, a circuit. No, not this circuit, this circuit. I started working on the easy part, the scenery. I made some stands and used WebGL, WebGPU and three.js logos as brands. I added wind dancers, it took me a while to figure out how those are named, and animated them in the vertex shader according to the elevation, the time, and a bunch of sine waves that I could hardly explain now. I added a leaderboard screen, but that's for later. Starting lights on a metallic structure. For the road, I started from a spline. I made some curves here and there, a cross section with a jump, but nothing too fancy. I tried it again and again until it felt okay in terms of difficulty and size. I added some white markings on the road using simple geometries, it's not textures, and I used the hash texture I mentioned earlier to add some details to the road. I added obstacles and explosive crates. I told you they would come in handy. When the user triggers the interactive point, the race starts and there is a lot happening. To draw the starting lights in one draw call, I offsetted each light slightly and moved the whole mesh forward to reveal them. With the right position, no z-fighting and the offset isn't noticeable. I implemented a weather and day cycle override so that the look and feel is always the same when the player is racing. Initially the timer was a HTML text, but I wanted something more immersive. So I added this little flying timer where the text is a simple canvas texture that I update on each frame. And it was also the opportunity to make the timer close to the car so that our eyes don't have to do a long stretch to know what's the current time. Checkpoints are defined in Blender and I use their scale and rotation to calculate each end of it so that I can also test when the player goes through the checkpoints. I drew the stripes directly in the shader and changed the color when we reach the checkpoint. Physics for the circuit was quite a challenge. I've been using the height fields for the floor of the whole world, which is kind of an optimized version of the tree mesh. And if you're familiar with tree meshes in most physics engines, you know how bad they are with fast-moving objects, and Rapier makes no exception. This resulted in objects feeling like they were colliding on invisible walls whenever they were sliding on the floor. To fix that, I'm not proud of this solution, but I created cuboids all along the road and removed the height field when we race. To prevent the user from going out of the race, I added a huge wall all around the world and also added visual fences, again only when we are racing. But since those physics walls are made with a tree mesh again, sliding against the fences sometimes results in an impact, slowing down the player. Unfortunately, I could not find a solution for this problem, and I can't just add huge or primitive all around the circuit because of the shape of that fence. If any of you have a better idea, please tell me. I knew some users would find a way to go through the walls, and they did. Since I removed the floor height fields while we are racing, remember that I now have cuboids all along the road, it would mean that the player would fall through the floor when going out of bounds, which actually was good. I simply teleported the player back to the latest checkpoint if the Y position goes below. This way the player is back on the circuit. Finally, you saw it, but I also animated some of the obstacles. And the animation is based on the racing time, meaning that the obstacle will always be at the same place at the same time of the race. Time to handle the finish line. When the player crosses the final checkpoint, timer stops and the player is moved to a podium. I use the same confetti as for the bowling and make them pop around the podium. Scores are saved on the server side and the leaderboard displays the top 10 using a simple canvas texture. If the player was fast enough, a prompt shows up so that he can choose a 3-letter tag with a flag and everybody will see the score in the leaderboard. Even though I implemented some securities, I knew some people were going to find flaws and cheat. Instead of fighting the cheaters, which is a never-ending fight, I decided to reset the score every day. Yes, some would cheat, especially at the beginning, but they will get bored and move on, leaving room to actual players the next day. Spoiler alert, I was right. Finally, I added a modal showing up when we press escape while racing. In that modal, I displayed the same leaderboard, but also buttons to restart, to end the race, and to show controls. I needed a place to show information about the portfolio, credit the developers who made this project possible, the libraries I'm using, and the various resources I used. And since I like to think of it as the behind the scene, I thought it would be fun to make it look like there is a hole in the world. Kind of a portal made of animated tiles in the floor. And to make it look like it's a hole, I use the same technique as the end portal in Minecraft, where the texture is positioned on screen coordinates, not in 3D. For the tiles, I created a bunch of frames and I animated the inside vertices to move with the time, but also according to the distance of the vehicle so that the portal closes when we drive over it, preventing the wheels to look like they are flying above the void. It's a little bit overkill to have this custom geometry with animated vertices, but it's slightly more performant than a huge plane with everything animated in the fragment shader. For the stars texture, I used the screen coordinate node and I did a slight parallax to have just a little bit of movement. And obviously, I added some glow on the edges. A little bit of scenery with lights plugged to generators, and there you go. Finally, I added an interactive point, a modal with basic content, and called it for the day. Alright, one final area and we are done with this episode. I'm doing a bit of a stretch with this one because I actually added it after the portfolio release. Many users asked me where they could test the old portfolio, so I added what I called a time machine. It's a little cozy place with everything I need: pizzas, drinks, a PlayStation, and a TV. Activating the interactive points opens the old portfolio, and colliding with the TV triggers a little Easter egg for my all-time favorite game on PlayStation 1, Metal Gear Solid. But you should not hear this sound since I haven't implemented audio yet. Yeah, this got to be the 4th game I mentioned in this devlog. Now you know where I get all my inspiration. And that's about it. If you enjoyed the devlog, please subscribe and leave a like. Follow me on X or Blue Sky for more creative and coding stuff. Don't forget that the portfolio is already live on bruno-simon.com. Let's see how fast you can finish the race without cheating. And I will start working on the next devlog right away. See you soon.